Housing is a fundamental human need. Constructing that housing is often a complex undertaking that requires understanding, patience, skill, and foresight. Developing affordable housing can be challenging for sure, but the reward can truly change people's lives, and for that, it's totally worth it. Let us explore that journey with the folks doing this important work. This is Housing Development, a practitioner's view.
In this episode, you will learn about assessing feasibility and viability, development sources and uses, and decision points.
Let's meet our panelists.
I'm Christine Hart. I'm the Executive Director of the Brattleboro Housing Partnerships, which is a DBA of the Brattleboro Housing Authority. I came to the authority 25 years ago when it was about to go into receivership, and I'm happy to say that it is now a high-performing housing authority in both public housing and Section 8. We've accomplished quite a bit. We have a supportive services team within the Housing Authority, which is, I think, remarkable for being a small entity. We have developed 2 LIHTC properties on the way to RAD and have worked through as a staff the destruction of 80 units in an elderly complex as a result of a flood. So we've done a lot, and it's been quite challenging, but very rewarding.
Hi, I'm David A. Northern Sr., CEO of the Champaign County Housing Authority. I've been in the industry over 22 years, and it's been an exciting 22 years also. Our whole goal is to help people overcome obstacles and move along that spectrum of self-sufficiency. Currently in Champaign, we have over $89 million of construction going on in affordable housing inside and outside our county. Also, I'm the current Senior Vice President of the Public Housing Authority Directors Association. I've had the opportunity to speak at the White House for smoke-free housing, and I had a chance to visit South Africa on a housing delegation with NARO.
Hi, my name is Mike Aston, the CEO of the Macon-Bibb County Housing Authority. I've been in the housing industry for 25 years, and probably one of the biggest highlights of my career was being able to start a Section 8 home ownership program, along with moving to RAD about 5 years ago. It's been a terrific journey.
Excellent. Now, let's get underway.
So in thinking about stakeholders, of course, we all agree that staff is a really important stakeholder, and they really need to understand what we're going to move to when we talk about RAD, the implications, the pros, the cons. One of the things that's interesting to think about is if you bring a small property and that small property becomes a standalone property, maybe 50, 60, 70, 80 units, you really have to build in what can that property pay the employee, what can the property pay the manager, the maintenance tech. And so that might be a little bit of a change from being a housing authority employee, where it's kind of all centralized, but as you break properties out, you've really got to look at what can this property afford to pay. Just like the open market, smaller properties tend to pay smaller salaries because there's not as much work to do, obviously. And so that's very, very important. And of course, the other stakeholders, more specifically, would be, how's this going to affect finance? How is this going to affect maintenance? How is this going to impact HR? And what other departments you might have in your housing authority? Insurance, yeah. There's risk and so on and so forth. So I think that's a really important thing to think about as you move properties.
Yeah. We combined our 4 into one project because of that, because they're small, and we just couldn't figure out a way to have an individual, any one of those, or a grouping of 2, could not handle the expenses. So we put them all together.
That's right.
With our portfolio, one of the things that we totally looked at, you know how HUD years ago made us go to the AMP type system.
Oh, yeah.
So we do billable hours for each property. We have management staff, and we divide it based on actual who put the work in on the property, whether it's maintenance, finance.
Sure, a work order type thing.
Work order type,
Sure, that's a good way to do it, absolutely.
Then you can really truly see how much that property is costing you as an individual related to the salaries, benefits, or maintenance, or work with lease up, anything. So.
For us, that's going to be one of it is now, but it's going to be even more so, a real retraining of our maintenance, because they're not used to putting in exactly you were in that building and how much time. And so that's going to be a training for them. They have tablets, it's all computerized. And they just, it's like, guys, you got to do it.
Sure,
You just
sure.
got to do it this
Yeah,
way.
you're moving from a centralized maintenance, a lot of times you're moving from a centralized maintenance apparatus to a decentralized. And so, yeah, it takes time to figure
Right.
that out, and it takes a lot of meetings and a lot of communication. But I think once the employees understand, then they become a true stakeholder, and you know, they can help the company move forward with a RAD
Right.
conversion. So.
When you say company, that's the right thing, because it's a business. And you know, we talked a lot about how we need to compete against the private market.
That's right.
And
That's right.
in a private market, that's how it's done. And so we have to change our mindsets and be prepared to adjust our thinking.
Sure.
You know, and having a staff buy-in,
Right.
let them allow them to make some of the decisions around that,
Yeah.
and make sure they're trained appropriately.
Yeah.
you know.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I think that's what's the most important thing when we start thinking differently, doing starting these different projects and
Sure.
programs, being a little more aggressive.
Yeah, I think so too. And specifically on training, you know, you're moving from the public housing platform to either PBRA or PBV.
Yeah.
It's completely different.
Right.
And you know, and so you've got to not only get the training on the front end for the employees, but continual training as you progress throughout the years, because compliance takes on a whole new,
That's
whole
what I
new,
was
a
thinking.
whole new meaning.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, compliance is all different, and now
yeah.
you've got to, we never thought about having an outside consultant to look over our LIHTC
Right,
files, and
right.
now we do,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's.
And you can find them pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And we have a compliance person. And so,
Yeah.
you know, we want to make
Yeah.
sure not only our RAD files, the ones that our staff is doing, but our property management companies
Yeah,
that's helping us also. You know,
Right.
with a diverse
Yeah.
portfolio, you have to make sure you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's,
Yeah.
especially with low-income housing tax credits. You don't want
Right.
to mix that up and mess that up.
Right.
Yeah,
And so we do file checks. And
Yeah.
you know, when I first arrived there and looking at some of the audit reports that our internal compliance department had,
Yeah.
it was bad.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so it's something that we get a report every week. I mean, every month we get a report on it,
Right.
and so we can adjust and build, or you know, identify more training that's needed, and communicate with the people that may make some of those errors,
Sure.
and that's going to build more trust within.
That's right.
You know, instead of you just smacking them on the wrist, you
Oh,
really
yeah.
That's right.
No,
Yeah,
that doesn't
training.
work.
You know, and speaking of building trust, you know, stakeholders that are really important, of course, are the residents.
Yes.
And
Right.
as we communicate with the residents, really what we found is some residents are nervous about RAD, but it really becomes a kind of a lesson in, you know, how do I build trust? How does the housing authority ensure that this group of residents really understands what we're doing? And it really boils down to meeting with them on a very regular basis,
Right.
taking them through the steps in RAD. You know, you don't really have to get into the weeds of RAD, but what we've found is people just really want to know, you know, is my rent going to change?
Exactly.
Is management going to change? You know, is my life as I know it going to change? And really, yeah, it's going to change, because you're probably going to get a better unit, which is a terrific thing. So, and residents tend to like that.
we've made much greater use of a resident advisory board. It's not really done in the technical, formal way. We're just too small for that. But that's a group we meet with monthly. Last month, we went over the whole 20-year replacement reserve program with them, and explained why some of the things they want us to do, paving, mowing a vacant lot, you know, how it just doesn't stack up when you've got
Right.
other really
Right.
big demands. This month, I'm bringing in the property budgets, and I'm going to go through those with
Good,
them and say, you know, here, this is how this works.
That's
and,
right.
you know, this is how, just the whole financial. And I don't expect them to become financial wizards, but I do expect them to understand that, yeah, this is a business.
A good
and
overview, sure.
We've got to have revenues, which
Right.
means you've got to pay your rent.
Right, sure, absolutely.
And we have to be responsive.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of
Right.
the things that, you know, housing authorities, as we talk about that change in the mindset, we have to really get out the mindset of not being responsive to our clients,
Right.
not
Oh,
being
yeah.
responsive to our property needs. You know, when you cut the grass, get the grass off the sidewalks.
Yes,
Yeah.
do a good
Yeah.
job.
The-
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's the little things
Yeah.
that matter sometimes.
Yeah.
And when the residents see the staff members buying into the ideal of change,
Yeah.
some of the residents are buying into the ideal of
Absolutely.
change. Now, you can't
Absolutely.
fix everyone, right?
That's right,
But
that's
being
right.
engaged with them, communicating with them, being there to laugh with them. You know, sometimes I just stop by the properties on weekends, me and my kids or something.
Just say hello.
Right, just saying, it's like, well, what you doing here? I was like, well, I missed you guys. You know,
Can't wait till Monday.
You know, I may see some things they shouldn't be doing, but
That's
I don't get on their case.
Right.
I may say, hey,
You'll
you know,
note it
you
for later.
you shouldn't, you know you're supposed to be doing that.
Sure. Yeah, and that's good. That's just good with the engagement and helping the stakeholders all come to the table. And you know, again, the board is a huge stakeholder.
Yes.
The community, of course, the board's probably the first group of people that have to get on board with this and help the housing authority move forward. So, as we talked about a little bit earlier, you know, each board member comes to the table with a real different skill set, and so I think it's good for housing authorities to use that skill set to help propel the authority and in this case, RAD forward. So.
Communication is the key. You know, a lot of times, you know, housing authorities, especially smaller housing authorities, they look at the travel budgets, and at times they don't want to send people to trainings and conferences. But I'm going to tell you one thing for certain: I've learned so much talking to colleagues or other board members at conferences or staff members. Then I learned sitting at home. And you got to realize, and I explained to my board, you know, it's important that you see what we do. That you see how we interact, that you're at that table, being an advocate, because I can tell them 5 things. When they see 20 other people doing the same thing, or tell them, then it sinks in. You know, sometimes they get tired of hearing your voice. And so, you know, that's to help build trust with them also.
Good. That's really good. And you know, board members, you meet with them once a month, basically, and sometimes they have a full-time job, sometimes they might be retired, but they don't think about this every day like we do. They might sit on various boards in a community. And so I find it often beneficial to, like you said, communicate, and continue to do it. And you know, sometimes you sound like a broken record, but it's got to sink in. So I think when we talk about strategic plans and business plans, with RAD it becomes even more vital. We all understand that, you know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, we were still a business, but that's even more true now, I think, as we move into looking at cash flows and return on investment. And really, not only return on investment from a financial standpoint, but return on investment from our community standpoint and our customer standpoint. And so I think with all those moving parts, it's really critical to have a strategic plan. Where do we want to be 2 to 5 years, 5 to 10, and so on. And along with that, a business plan that kind of maps out how you're going to get there, and then communicating that with your board and with the community and with our customers. So I think it's very, very vital.
And why you need to do it. You know, that's just like the pro forma that we utilize. So that business plan is for that pro forma for the organization to make sure we cash flow at the end and we can sustain ourselves. You know, that was something that, you know, a lot of housing authorities we didn't ever think about. You know, now we train our staff top to bottom, get them engaged. You put your business plan on a website along with your strategic plan, keep the community engaged with it, and that process helps. You know, it helps the community, it helps your board members, your staff, your community partners to think, oh, this is a business. You know, it's just not a government-funded. You know, this is a business. You know, I mean, we're a contractor. And so we have to treat ourselves as such. And having that business plan really helps.
And I think you get HUD to understand that too. But some, you know, I love HUD to death, but sometimes they don't quite understand that. Look, we have to operate on very variable revenue cycles. And so
you love HUD to death?
Some people.
I love HUD too.
We all do.
We got to, you know, crack it up just a little bit.
But yeah, I mean, it just, you know, they have to understand that. Sometimes they don't. And so we you know, we have, over the years, the housing industry has really suffered from the very variable revenue streams. And so here comes RAD, and it's just a great opportunity. But along with that, you've just got to have some strategic planning.
Well, I think, as you said, we went through a very great strategic planning process, and the board was heavily involved. Everybody was in 2016. And now going into RAD, that's the business plan that's going to implement our strategic plan, because we are a mission-driven business. Business is important.
Absolutely.
And that's what I think some people, at least in my community, sort of cringe. What? Business? Ooh, you know, and it's like, no. You know, if we don't pay attention to the business side of this, then we're not going to be here to carry out the mission, and you want us here.
Got to have us. Got to have us.
We talked about developing 501c3s, you know, instrumentalities. You know, we have to share the wealth throughout. You know, a lot of people just they put all the financing or salaries or benefits on the housing authority.
Right.
You have to spread the wealth out
That's right.
and make sure each entity is paying for itself.
Yeah,
That's
that's
right.
And in that business plan, that's how you can design it
Yeah.
and making
Yeah.
sure that
Yeah.
occurs. Billable services.
Sure.
At times, you may take your board member somewhere for lunch to sit down and have a meeting with someone.
Right.
What am I talking about?
Right.
Right. And people need to understand that we are a business, so
That's right.
it will be some expenses.
Sure.
Well, I think training is one.
Oh yeah.
Training is something that boards can look at. Mine doesn't. Mine says, great.
Yeah. Just get it done.
Get
Yeah.
employees trained.
Yeah.
Get yourself
Yeah.
trained.
Yeah.
Stay up with the business.
Yeah.
But that's an area where people can look at that and go, well, yeah, they really don't need to go there.
Well,
And
well,
yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Industry
Yeah.
groups, right? So I tell people all the time, in a business, sometimes the business deal is done on a golf course.
Sure.
That's right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In our industry, a lot of our business is done in Washington
Yeah.
or at the conferences
Yeah. Mhm.
where
Yeah.
we build initial relationships.
Sure.
And where I first got the idea from a business plan was at a conference.
Right.
You know,
That's right.
talking to a more mature executive director that's been in the industry
Sure.
a lot longer than I,
Sure.
and he said, what's your business plan?
Right.
And I was like,
That's right.
business plan?
Right.
And that was years ago, and so
Sure.
now that's one of the first things I always think about.
Sure.
Let's work on a business plan. And doing that, it helps it helps the community buy in, your stakeholders.
Sure.
You involve them also.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
then it's something that we call going public, right?
Yep.
You message it out.
Yeah.
This is
Right,
what we
right.
did, and this is why we did it,
Yeah.
and here it is.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think from a small housing authority perspective, being with, I always refer to you guys as the big dogs, is so great. I
Right,
mean, the
right.
things that I scale them back, but I
Sure,
can bring
sure.
back and explain to my staff and look at, and we
Right.
can make it
Sure.
fit us.
your community and your
It's
housing authority.
terrific. And they go,
Absolutely.
where'd you get that?
Yeah.
And I'll say, well, I was just meeting with the guys.
It's super. That's just a way to do it.
So it's a real benefit
Yeah.
to a small housing
Yeah.
authority to get out and find out what other people are doing.
I like that. Get out and find out.
It's a
You know.
business expense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Sure.
Because if you're not at that table, you're on the menu, and everything that you want to do, like I said before, it probably already was done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're an industry that share the wealth.
Absolutely.
And so, if an agency need to see someone's business plan, it's no problem. First
Right.
of all, it's public.
Sure, it's public, and we share admin
And we
plans,
share.
and,
It's-
and
Right.
in the old days, ACOPs and all that.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's-
ACOP.
it's really
I'm
nice.
out of MTW,
Yeah.
No,
all rad,
Thank goodness.
affordable, no more ACOP.
Right. Thank
Still got to
goodness.
have an admin plan though,
Right, but
but
that's
that
all right.
just aligns with our MTW plan.
That's
But
right.
even with the organization moving toward move to work,
Yeah.
it's even more important to have a business plan
Yeah. Yes.
to align
And
those
share with the
costs.
residents.
You got to share with the residents.
Customers. Yeah.
It's some strategic goals HUD has in line when they talk about MTW. The tiered rents and it's a business. Why are you
Yeah.
tiering it?
Yeah.
Why are you setting
Right.
these rent schedules
Yeah.
like this? So
Yeah.
it's important to understand it and that it'll work for you into the future.
Yeah.
right.
Well, when we were thinking about MTW, the best thing was to go to the MTW conference. And,
Oh, sure.
and just I was so impressed.
Rub
you know.
elbows with people.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that's, can't say enough about just getting out and meeting your peers.
That's right.
I think as we talk about partners and who needs to be at the table, I think we cannot leave out our management staff. In fact, our whole staff.
Right.
But some of that is going to be how you manage. And I manage very collectively. I really bring staff in. I want to hear what they have to say. And I think all the staff needs to be there,
Absolutely.
regardless of what they're doing. I mean, they may have a Section 8, niche over there, but that fellow's given us some great ideas as we moved
Absolutely.
around. So I bring in all my management staff and then make sure that we have a message, as you would say, a message that they can bring to their staffs, and
Sure.
it goes on from there. But I think that's really critical.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do this stuff without my management staff.
That's the saying, one agency, one voice.
Sure.
And you make sure that voice is articulated throughout.
Right.
And one of the things I really like to do to help with the decision making, I try to sit down with each staff member once a year at least. I see them other times,
Sure.
but I give them that time, that 5-10 minutes. once a year, tell me anything you want to tell me.
Right.
I'm not going to run back and tell your supervisor.
Right.
If you say you hate this place, if you say, you know, whatever you want to say, you say it.
Sure.
But you open that door.
Yep.
And,
Right.
you know, sometimes we think about somebody that's in public housing.
Right.
And then you have somebody who's in maintenance.
Yep.
And somebody in Section 8. Well, when we sit at that table and we talk and communicate, they may give you great ideas that you never thought of.
That's right. That's right.
Because they're in the trenches. And so they have to be a part of that decision-making process. You know, you don't want to make all the decisions yourself, right? I don't want to always be the smartest person in the room.
No.
Well, I know I'm not.
Yeah.
Me either.
But, you know, sometimes because of our leadership roles,
Right.
people assume
That's the
Yes.
case,
that
right.
he's going to make all the decisions, or she's going to make all the decisions. No, it's our organization.
Yeah, it's a collective.
Collective.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about moving to RAD and you're talking about bringing all your employees in, absolutely. And some will play different roles, and I think that part of those discussions should be, when we convert to RAD, how is this going to impact finance? How will this impact management? How will this impact maintenance? And you know, right now in our organizations, one thing that's done in one division always affects another division. And
Right.
sometimes you don't intend that to happen, but it does. And so again, the more you can get together and iron out those bugs and try to work those things out, the better. And then the disciplines, the compliance, the accounting, you know, what will change. And so people really need to understand that we're going to, you know, if you're going to a PBRA, you're going to do 5/8 or 5/9, excuse me, from now on instead of 5/8. And so there's just, and the accounting will be a little bit different. The reporting will be a little bit different. The compliance will certainly be different. And the management will be a little bit different. So yeah, everybody's got to be on board and go through each one of those steps. And I think when you do that, it kind of gives people, lessens their fear factor. And they feel a little bit more comfortable about
Accountability.
it. So, sure.
Right? You know, you guys talking from a non-MTW agency. As a non-MTW agency, and when you're talking about staff decisions, you have to really think about anything that you want to do as an MTW agency. If you put it in as an activity, you get that block grant money.
Yeah.
And so you have to look at the activity and make sure you clearly put down what you want to do as an organization. And HUD, in most cases, will approve it. You can be really creative with it. And so when we talk about RAD, we talk about development, we talk about investments, it's in my MTW plan. And so I had a flexibility to do that, to use some of that block grant money in a different way versus, you know, the public housing, the Section 8, the capital fund.
Yeah, all in silos.
In silos, right? And so it gives us more flexibility, and you know, having the staff help make those decisions, you know, and a community.
Sure.
You know, you got to bring in your partner. So decision making, as you said before, is a collective effort, and you know, and then you have a collective community buy-in.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And I think you get a better result.
Absolutely.
You know, I throw an idea out on the table, and by the, you know, I just let it go. It's I don't own. You know, my ownership is very tiny on this. You know, what I want is the best solution for the community, for the staff, for the residents, one that we can really be proud of and do, that we can implement it.
Yeah.
And
I like what you say, be proud of it. You know, when it's all done, and it will eventually, RAD does end at some point, when you finish and you look back, you want something that everybody can be proud of. And I think that you do that by bringing everybody in on the front end. So when you talk about RAD, you know, you've got to create new entities. As you bring properties over, single properties or groups of properties, it's really essential, I think, to start not-for-profit corporations to handle those properties, to create less of a liability for the housing authority. And it's relatively easy to do in each state. Each state has its own laws and regulations, but setting up an LLC or nonprofit is pretty easy to do, and it's a tool really that housing authorities have at their disposal that not all companies have. And so it's an essential tool that I think the industry uses pretty well, and I think housing authorities can employ that to help themselves, to help the residents, and really it becomes a good business decision. And with LIHTC, as we were talking about earlier, you've got to do that. The partners require that, but as you move just a straight RAD deal, it's really good to do that and help the staff understand this is what we've got, this is its own corporation. The housing authority is still the parent body, but this property has to stand on its own, and you know, you can do that and set up a fee structure and earn money.
well, I think that really supports the whole notion of the business plan and bringing the staff in and saying, okay, now this property is its own corporation, guys.
Right,
It's its
sure.
own business, and
Sure.
we've all got to operate
Yeah,
that way.
yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's a great idea.
Sure.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, the protection, right? You know, it's just so important. Housing authorities have the ability to do a lot, but with the resource of a not-for-profit, 501c3 and LLCs, we can do so much more.
Yeah.
We're limited in terms of what we
Right.
can do. But again, the business sense, you create a not-for-profit that manage properties. You can make money.
That's right.
You're self-sustainable. You create a not-for-profit as your development arm to do your development, not just for your organization, but maybe outside.
That's right.
You know, we have to really think business-like and be mindful that our area is in need of affordable housing. Our area is in need of some of these resources. But in a state, it's other communities. There's housing authorities I knew where their not-for-profits broke off and they're their own entity now. And they're doing development across the nation.
Sure.
Wow.
You know, and so it's so important to safeguard your resources, but also use your tools and to be flexible.
Yeah. And really, the sky's the limit. I've known housing authorities that do a lot of work in their community, a lot of work in the state maybe, and across the nation as well. And I think by doing that, setting up those not-for-profit corporations, it gives you the ability to do that. And I think it works really in a way to benefit so many people. You know, one of the things that I think's really important is you're setting up these structures, have a good attorney, and make sure
Right.
that the legal team understands what you're trying to do, and that you cross all your cross all your T's and dot all your I's, because that's important if you're going to set them up. And that the board understands as well what you're doing.
Right. Right.
You know, one of the things that we really have to think about is the disinvestment of resources that HUD provided for our residents in terms of overcoming obstacles or drug elimination. We talked about how that was eliminated years ago. And so we created a not-for-profit called the Housing Authority of Champaign County Enrichment Foundation. And its whole focus is to raise money to provide scholarships and enrichment opportunities for our young people, access. Right? You know, in Lake County, we had a gala that raised close to $150,000 over 5 years. And the gala was for 3 purposes. We messaged our organization and let them know we're a business and what we do and who we are. We gave a few awards out to community and great partners to keep them engaged, right? Stakeholders, right? And then we raised that money, and so that we can help our clients, especially with now being an MTW. That's our whole goal, is to have people move along that spectrum and utilizing that. We have hundreds of millions of dollars worth of development going on, right? You know, and sometimes the developers and the contractors come from outside our communities. And so they can invest in people, and sometimes people want to help others.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
And having that not-for-profit.
Now they've got an avenue.
And then they have an avenue. They can get the tax break for it. It's its own entity, and it has a different board. You know, I made sure the board wasn't the same because my housing authority, all my other not-for-profits has the same board members as the housing authority. But this one is different because it's a different focus. It's focused on raising money, so I have attorneys and doctors, community leaders and bankers a part of it. But one board member is on it, and the board has to approve all the members. So we still had a control. So
I think that's super because you've got people on your board who are in the community, and they become, by being exposed to what you're doing on the other side, they become ambassadors for you. And they can bring their knowledge. You know, we've talked a lot about board members and the skill sets that they can bring. Well, now you're bringing in a whole new skill set from different walks of life and for this particular purpose. And it's just really good for the housing authority.
And it's education. You know, it's a lot of organizations in our communities and partners that we work with. And I remember one that we were working with is called Boys to Men. It's a mentoring group. And they went to DC, and I was able to utilize my platform to get them tickets to the congressional visits.
That's great.
We got them to the African American Museum of History. Our congressman did a great job in supporting them. But when they got back, we talked, and I said, you know, if you want to continue to do this and grow, you need a not-for-profit. And they was like, a not-for-profit, what's that? So I picked up the phone and called our attorney. All the not-for-profits that he set up for us, I said, hey, we got a local company. I mean, a local organization that really need a not-for-profit to continually move in a great direction. They volunteered and did it. And so sometimes as organizations, we have to use our platform to help others and educate people. So us setting up not-for-profits and people asking those questions may help other organizations, you know, sustain themselves also.
Now, let's dive a little deeper with a question and answer discussion. And now we'd like to turn our attention to some questions that we've received. And we remind the audience, for those out there, feel free to send any questions that might have come up during the conversation that we just concluded. Using the GoToWebinar tool, you may need to expand that out to do so. And while we let a few more questions come in, let's start with this. David, I want to point the first question to you. Someone's asking, what are ways that you've engaged residents to create buy-in?
Well, buy-in is something that's very important. One of the things that is important is, you find a couple resident leaders out there and help spread the word and the information, but, going to where they live. It's always good to have individuals come to your office and you meet with them. But when you can go out to one of the resident leaders' home and sit down with them and just have a candid conversation about some of the goals we have as an organization. And we all know that in terms of our residents, word travel pretty fast, right? They can be our biggest media outlet in terms of information throughout. So that's one of the ways that we really utilize our residents to help us out in the right way. Resident leaders, along with people that's natural leaders. Everybody that's voted in as a resident leader may not be an actual leader. So we try to identify those individuals and stay close to them in order to help our agenda move forward.
Excellent. Excellent, Mike. Question regarding development subsidies. What is the benefit of having a development subsidy?
So in terms of the PBRA subsidies that will come in, or PBV, that's the major portion of your revenue, just like it is now under public housing operating subsidy. As you move towards the either model you go to on PBV or PBRA, you'll get a bump and you'll have the new RAD rents, and that becomes your subsidized piece of that monthly income from just a different side of HUD over in the asset management program. So that becomes a major part of your revenue.
Gotcha.
Does that answer the question? I mean,
I believe so. And if there's
Okay.
any follow up from the question asker, we'll get some. But to me, that answers the question. Thank you. Thank you. Christine, are there different communication plans that you use for different stakeholders?
I would say we probably, but generally we think that honesty and transparency is the best process, and try to use that consistently throughout the community, with everybody. And so I think if we were actually making media booklets, they'd be a little different depending on the audience, but by and large, we keep our message uniform and pretty easy to understand and pretty clear about where we're going and why we're going there.
Excellent. Excellent. David, we have a question for you. What are ways that you've engaged management to create buy-in?
Well, sometimes you have to create buy-in by allowing the managers or your team members to kind of make the decisions. You kind of guide them in a way, or allow them to, complete the thoughts of where you want to go with things. You come up with the big picture idea. I call it the balcony and the dance floor. From the balcony, you say, this is what we want to do. But, on the dance floor, that's when the people, where the rubber meets the road, where the staff is really implementing those ideas. You allow them to do that, as relate to that process. And then I think buy-in will naturally come. It's just being open and honest and listening to them, and actually utilizing the information that they provide you to benefit the programs or whatever direction the agency may want to go.
Sure. David, quick, another question for you. You mentioned your not-for-profit entities. We have a question specific to that example that you used. Did you use your current staff to staff that entity?
Yes. So the not-for-profits aren't staffed in the sense where they have their own offices and things like that. We kind of just do billable services with them now for our developments, along with our foundation. The person oversees the foundation is our enrichment coordinator. So they're all about the scholarships and our for access for our young people. And far as the development aspects, I'm the CEO of the development not-for-profits, along with the foundation not-for-profits. And so it's just between my executive administrator and our finance people, myself, or any staff that's in the development. We just pay for those services through the not-for-profit.
Gotcha. Christine, are there relocation specialist firms to help with resident relocation?
Well, in our area, I'm sure there are, especially in the bigger communities. Our housing land trust has done so much relocation. They've really become the go-to organization for that. They were not available when we had to do a major relocation, and we were really sorry that they weren't. But I'm sure in bigger communities, I mean, David, Mike, I suspect that there are companies that just do this.
There are. I'll real quickly say that if you're in an area where maybe there's, not a lot of firms, or you're not in a big city, one thing you can do is maybe reach out to life tech developers in the state who all the time relocate people with 9 or 4% tax credit deals, and they oftentimes are willing to lend some help or maybe contract out an individual to come to your housing authority and help you think through that, and you can do that on a contract basis. But almost all major life tech developers in almost every state will have experience in relocation.
Excellent point. Mike, let's stay with you. What's the biggest resistance that you've seen to change with respect to your stakeholders?
That's a very good question. So if I start with my employees, and this is 5-6 years ago when we first got into RAD, back then we had a centralized maintenance apparatus. And when we converted several of our properties, we went to a property-based maintenance apparatus. And there was some resistance to that simply because we hadn't done it that way before. But as we looked at other models, as David and Christine has mentioned, that's just how you do it in the private property management business. So we had a lot of meetings with our employees and got them to a comfort level for the buy-in. And of course, 5-6 years later, it's doing great and there's no resistance. As far as the tenants or the residents, there wasn't a lot of resistance, and I think the reason there was not is simply because we met with him on a continual basis before the conversion, and the theme of the message every single time was, look, we're going to do this. This is what it means, but this doesn't mean. And what it doesn't mean is that your day-to-day life is not going to change. The property manager is still going to be your property manager. You're going to have maintenance on your unit. If you have an issue, you call your property manager. So once we established that open communication and did it frequently, we didn't have any resistance from our residents whatsoever. And of course, in the community, they were happy to see that the properties were remodeled and some additional capital got brought to the table. So it all boils down to lots of communication early and routinely.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, David mentioned something to that effect during the conversation a little earlier. So communication. Excellent. Thank you, Mike. David, we have actually a follow-up to the question regarding the nonprofit entities. Regarding the use of your staff, are they still housing authority employees?
Yes. I have a contractor that helps out here and there when we need that type of assistance, but it's housing authority employees. And when we do our developments with our not-for-profit, for example, it's a public-private partnership. So the housing authority is in the deal also. So it just depends. We try to really take a look at what activity is being performed at that time and make sure that, we put most of the fees and costs, for that development fee. We don't want to put it on the backs of the housing authority if possible. As far as the Enrichment Foundation, all the funds that we raise for the Enrichment Foundation, that not-for-profit goes toward our clients and as relates to scholarships and access to opportunities. For example, we took a bunch of young people to the Illinois football game, tailgate, and the homecoming, and it was some of them first time ever being exposed to that type of activity, and that's what we call by access.
Interesting. Let's stay with you, David. We got one last question for you. What is the downside and the upside to RAD when it comes to redevelopment of a property?
Well, when you're looking at RAD, it depends on it's your rents, right? If your rents make it work, if your cash flow will work after your rehab, the biggest downside is at the end of the day, will the rents work, or what debt will you have? what mechanisms do you have really to make the repairs that you need to make to your units. Now, when we did our RAD, we was able to make repairs to our units. For some of them, one was in a bad situation, so we decided to sell that property off, and we had a new construction low-income tax credit RAD replacement that we're doing for that property. So it just depends on the area. One of the biggest downsides I can tell you, this is from experience, find the right consultants, talk to the right people.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And if I if I can quickly jump in, absolutely. Dave is right. If there's really no downside if you can make it pencil out, because if you can make it pencil out with a pro forma based on the rent revenue that RAD will give you, and your estimated expenses based on history, then there's really no downside. But if you can't make it work because maybe you've got a property that needs too deep of an infusion of cash for RAD to work, then you go another route. But in my opinion, there's just, if it works on the front end, there's no downside that I can see.
Christine, you want to jump in on this too?
No, I totally agree. Totally agree.
Perfect. All right, Mike, I'm going to give you the last word. We got one more question. If there's any other last minute questions, feel free to send them in. Mike, what about training for staff members? How would you go about doing something like that?
Absolutely. So before you convert, or as you start to convert, make sure that your staff, especially at the managerial level, get training on what they will have to do as far as recertifications, how they will have to invoice HUD. Now they're dealing with a 50059 rather than a 58 in public housing and so on. And then I would just make sure that there's a compliance piece added into that, because it's one thing to run the operation from day to day, but it's another thing to make sure that you're in compliance. And so I'd make sure I got some compliance people from the outside to come in and say, okay, you're going to get an MOR, which is a management occupancy review, every year by HUD, and they're going to come in and they're going to look at your operation, they're going to look at your files and so on and so forth. And there's a checklist. You can go online and find HUD's MOR checklist, and that's where I would start, and just make sure that they're very well versed in the HUD manual on the asset management side, which is the 4950. It's called the 4950.
That's really great advice. I will open it up if anyone else wants to chime in on potentially training staff members.
Well, I'll just add that training is extremely important when you're doing this. One of the mechanisms that I would like to use is that instead of sending staff off, I would like to bring trainers in and cross-train everybody that we can, in terms of, one thing is more beneficial, but even for the staff that's not in the front line, the other staff need to understand the changes that's being made when we're looking at RAD and those other type of development opportunities. And so if you bring somebody in to train your entire staff, or a number of staff members that may not be directly engaged to that activity, but will touch it in some way, it's really beneficial.
Great point.
Good point.
All right. As far as training is concerned, I'll quickly throw out there HEI Group's online training is a wonderful resource for certifications, compliant courses, and to David's point, you could even group view if you want to get your group together and sit down as a unit and watch some training that way. HEI Group's online training can do that. I want to thank everyone out there for joining us today. I also want to thank our panelists for sharing their insights. We hope you were able to take some things away from the conversation today and the question and answer period that we just concluded. Please be on the lookout for future live episodes as part of this web series. We'll be doing them once a month, and our next episode is scheduled to air on December 18th. Lastly, please check out HEI Group's online training platform to catch up on the past episodes and exclusive bonus footage. There is some bonus material that our panelists were able to speak to, and we hope that you guys go and check that out. With that, I wish you all a wonderful day, and thanks again. Housing is a fundamental need indeed, and we thank our guests for sharing their insights on how they are actively working to construct more of it. Please check out other episodes of this series as we continue to explore the journey. This has been Housing Development, a practitioner's view.